The Empire's cruel joke. The Galactic Empire had conquered countless worlds, subjugating species of all shapes and sizes beneath its crushing rule. Strength and technological prowess determined one's place in the hierarchy, and humanity, as far as the Empire was concerned, had neither. Humans were a joke. Unlike the massive Zelther war beasts, the telekinetic YRVL, or the chitin-armored Voltheri, humans were seen as soft and fragile. Their muscles were weak, their senses dull. Their inability to produce natural energy fields like many alien races made them, in the eyes of the Empire, nothing more than amusing oddities. And so, the Empire treated them as such, playthings for the nobility, servants for their houses, and, in some cases, prey for their games. It was in this way that Serena Locke found herself on Vorthis 9, an Imperial hunting reserve where rare and exotic creatures were released for the entertainment of the elite. She had been captured from a distant human colony, sold as a curiosity to an Imperial noble, and then cast into the reserve for sport. The alien hunters who brought her here were laughing, their reptilian voices filled with contempt as they released her into the thick, rust-colored forests of Vorthis 9. "Run, human," sneered Lord Vraknos, a towering, blue-scaled noble with golden eyes. "Give us a show." The assembled crowd of aristocrats chuckled. Serena ignored them, her sharp eyes scanning the landscape as her fingers twitched at her sides. She needed to know the terrain, understand the environment, and most of all, survive. But she wasn't alone. At her side, sniffing at the air with a lazy sort of indifference, was Rascal, a honey badger. His black and white fur bristled as he caught the scent of something unfamiliar, and he made a deep, guttural sound of warning. To the aliens watching, he was just another primitive beast, another weak pet to be hunted alongside his owner. They had no idea what they were in for. The hunt began. Serena wasted no time, bolting into the underbrush, Rascal following close behind. She knew their arrogance would give her a few minutes of a head start. They expected her to panic, to run in a straight line until exhaustion took her. Instead, she doubled back, moving low to the ground, finding a vantage point among the gnarled trees where she could observe her hunters. The aliens entered the forest in leisurely fashion, their armor gleaming, their plasma rifles humming with energy. This was entertainment for them. They did not expect a challenge. "You should be honored, human," Lord Vraknos called into the trees. "You will provide us with an afternoon's amusement before your inevitable end. Perhaps, if you make it entertaining enough, we will name a hunting ground after you." Serena did not respond. She was too busy crafting a plan. Her eyes fell on one of the hunters, a smaller, bird-like alien who was holding his rifle carelessly, completely unaware of the danger he was in. That was her first target. With practiced efficiency, she grabbed a heavy stone and flung it at a tree, creating a sharp, sudden noise. The bird-like hunter spun toward the sound, his elongated neck craning to see what had made it. That was his mistake. Serena lunged from the shadows, striking him hard in the throat with the side of her hand. He crumpled with a gurgling noise, and before he could cry out, she relieved him of his weapon. The rifle was too advanced for her to use properly, but it made a perfect club. The second hunter barely had time to register what had happened before Serena cracked the butt of the rifle against his temple, dropping him instantly. That was when Rascal struck. A third alien, a hulking brute covered in thick, armored plates, stepped forward, raising his own weapon. He never got the chance to fire. Rascal moved like lightning, his small but powerful body slamming into the alien's exposed joint. Teeth and claws tore through flesh and sinew with terrifying ease. The brute screamed, trying to shake the honey badger off, but Rascal did not let go. He bit down harder, ripping through muscle, sending black blood spurting across the ground. The remaining hunters hesitated. Their prey had just taken out 3 of their number in the span of seconds. Serena locked eyes with Lord Vraknos, a slow grin spreading across her face. She could see the surprise, the doubt, beginning to creep into his expression. "Still amused?" she asked. The noble bared his fangs, his amusement gone. "Kill them both," he snarled. Serena didn't wait. She grabbed the fallen bird-like hunter's plasma knife and disappeared into the foliage once more. Rascal, his muzzle dripping with alien blood, followed close behind. The hunt turns. Serena crouched low in the shadows of a gnarled tree, her breath steady, her eyes narrowing as she observed the alien hunters around her. They had grown cautious, realizing that their prey was not as helpless as they had believed. The forest had shifted from a place of sport to a deadly battleground, and the Imperials were beginning to understand that they were no longer the predators. Rascal, ever the vigilant partner, sat silently beside her. His black and white fur blended seamlessly with the dark underbrush, his sharp eyes glinting as he scanned the area. The honey badger was more than just an ally. He was her weapon, fierce and unrelenting. Together, they were a force the Imperials had no idea how to handle. The remaining hunters had spread out, their once lax movements now tense, deliberate. Serena could hear their faint murmurs, their whispers of doubt as they navigated the twisted, blood-red trees. The initial arrogance had faded, replaced by uncertainty and fear. They were no longer pursuing her. They were hunting her in desperation, afraid that the tables had already turned. A familiar guttural growl from Rascal snapped her from her thoughts. Her gaze flicked to the left, where the movement had caught his attention. Two hunters were approaching, cautiously but purposefully. One was a massive reptilian, his scaled body armored in thick, reflective plating. The other, smaller but no less dangerous, was an insectoid, its many mandibles twitching in agitation as it clutched a plasma rifle in its forearms. Serena's pulse quickened. She needed a move now. She motioned to Rascal, and the honey badger instantly understood. Without a sound, he disappeared into the underbrush, a streak of black and white moving with terrifying speed. Serena, meanwhile, pressed herself closer to the ground, barely making a sound as she slithered forward, her body low and hidden by the dense foliage. She needed to make the first move, or they would overrun her. The insectoid was the first to reach the clearing ahead. It moved cautiously, its many legs clicking on the forest floor as it scanned the area with eerie precision. It was looking for movement, looking for Serena. But it didn't see her, not until it was too late. Rascal struck like a shadow. The insectoid screeched as the honey badger pounced from behind, slashing with his razor-sharp claws. His attack was precise, targeting the vulnerable joints in the alien's armor. The insectoid let out a sharp, high-pitched cry, but Rascal's jaws closed around one of its exposed mandibles, tearing it free with terrifying strength. Serena's focus never wavered. She used the distraction, the chaos, to her advantage. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, rising from her crouch with a fluid motion. In one smooth strike, her plasma knife buried itself deep into the reptilian's throat, just below the thick plating. The alien staggered, its movements slow as it tried to raise its weapon. But it was already too late. Serena's blade found its mark again, ripping through the reptilian's windpipe. It collapsed, the life drained from its massive body before it hit the ground. Blood poured from the wound, dark and thick, pooling at her feet. The hunter's armor did little to stop her. She was swift, and in her hands, the plasma knife was a tool of death. The insectoid, though wounded, managed to react just in time. It twisted its body, its mandibles clicking in fury, and tried to retreat, but it was too slow. Rascal was on it again, clawing at its legs with savage fury. The insectoid tried to rise, but the honey badger's relentless assault left it no room to fight back. Serena didn't wait for the inevitable scream. She was already moving, her blade flashing in the dim light as she pressed the attack. The insectoid's armor crumpled beneath her assault, and she drove the blade deep into its chest cavity. The alien gasped, its many eyes bulging as it shuddered in death. Rascal released his grip, stepping back with a growl. Blood dripped from his jaws, and his eyes were wild, reflecting the excitement of the hunt. Serena turned to him, a quiet grin crossing her face. The hunters, once so confident, had been reduced to nothing more than corpses at her feet. Good boy, she murmured, crouching to give him a quick, approving scratch behind the ears. They didn't have much time. The remaining hunters would be closing in now, aware that their comrades had fallen. Serena's mind raced as she assessed the situation. There were still too many left, but that wouldn't stop her. The tables had turned, and the Imperials would soon learn just how deadly a human could be. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement, a rustling in the underbrush. Serena tensed, her hand gripping the hilt of the plasma knife. She glanced at Rascal, who was already moving toward the noise, his body low to the ground. The next wave of hunters was coming, and they were going to be far more cautious. From her vantage point, Serena could see a group of 4, their movements slow but deliberate as they advanced. One was a towering brute covered in thick, jagged armor. The others, smaller and swifter, moved with careful coordination. They were clearly working together, but it wouldn't matter. Serena knew their weaknesses. She could hear them now, their voices growing louder, more panicked. They were searching for her, calling out, but they couldn't see her. They had no idea where the threat was coming from. They were afraid, and that fear, Serena knew, would be their downfall. With a sudden, calculated motion, Serena grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it toward the edge of the clearing. It crashed loudly into a tree, sending a shower of splinters into the air. The hunters immediately spun toward the noise, their weapons raised, their eyes darting around in search of movement. That was the moment she needed. She moved fast, too fast for them to track, darting from cover to cover. Rascal followed her lead, weaving through the shadows like a ghost. The hunters turned, trying to adjust, but it was already too late. Serena was upon them, and her blade was already sinking into the chest of the nearest soldier. Chaos erupted. The hunters tried to fight back, but Serena was relentless. Each strike, each move was calculated and precise. Rascal, ever the loyal companion, tore through the remaining hunters with vicious efficiency. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. When the last of the hunters fell, Serena stood amidst the bodies of her enemies, breathing heavily but triumphant. Rascal padded up to her side, his fur matted with alien blood, his eyes bright with victory. The forest was silent once more, save for the distant crackling of fire. Serena glanced up at the sky, the weight of what they had done settling in. This was no longer a hunt. It was a war, and she was going to win. Empire and fear. The bodies of the fallen hunters were discovered at dawn, and fear gripped the Imperial ranks. The game had become a massacre. Lord Vrachnos stood in the command tent, staring at the reports with disbelief. A single human and a primitive beast had turned his elite hunters into prey. It was unheard of. "Explain this to me," he growled, his golden eyes narrowing at his officers. "How is a single human woman slaughtering my men?" Silence filled the room. No one dared to speak the truth, that they had all underestimated the human. Serena Locke and her honey badger, Rascal, had become nightmares in the trees. They struck without warning, vanishing before the Imperials could retaliate. Bodies were found mutilated, throats ripped out, and armor torn open as if by monstrous claws. Vrachnos had thought this would be sport. Instead, it had become an execution. One of his lieutenants hesitated before speaking. "She is using guerrilla tactics, Lord Vrachnos. Hit-and-run attacks, ambushes. We cannot track her movements." "Then burn the forest," Vrachnos spat. "Flush her out." They tried. Firebombs rained down, setting the crimson foliage ablaze. Smoke choked the skies, and the alien nobles, once laughing spectators, now watched in uneasy silence. The hunt had turned against them, and for the first time in centuries, an Imperial noble knew what it was like to be afraid. But Serena was already ahead of them. She used the smoke to her advantage, striking unseen. One by one, Vrachnos' soldiers fell, their bodies dragged into the undergrowth. Their armor did nothing to stop a blade to the throat or Rascal's relentless, blood-soaked fury. The mighty Empire, feared across the galaxy, was crumbling before a single human and her beast. Vrachnos himself began to feel it, that creeping, inescapable dread. He had mocked humans once, called them pets, weaklings. Now, as he heard the screams of his dying men, he wondered if the real pets were the Imperials, and Serena was simply putting them down. By nightfall, half his forces were gone. And then, the radio crackled. A whisper, a woman's voice. Run. It was the last word Lord Vraknos would ever hear before the darkness closed in around him. The fall of the mockers. The skies above Vorthis. 9 had turned a muted orange, the dying light casting long shadows over the blood-soaked earth. The last of the Imperial hunters lay in heaps across the forest floor, their bodies twisted in grotesque poses, their arrogance and hubris now their epitaphs. There is no sound of victory, no cheer, only the heavy silence of the battlefield. For Serena Locke and her honey badger, Rascal, this was more than survival. It was a statement, a testament to the fact that the so-called pets of the galaxy were far from weak. Serena stood amidst the carnage, her breathing steady, her eyes alert. She was a force of nature, a human unlike any the Empire had encountered. The thrill of the hunt had long since faded, replaced by a cold, calculated resolve. The Imperials had underestimated humanity, mocked their strength, their resolve. And now, the Empire would feel the weight of that mistake. She wiped her blade clean on the fabric of a fallen hunter's armor and glanced at Rascal. The honey badger was circling the bodies, his black and white fur streaked with blood, his eyes gleaming with an unholy satisfaction. He had been her companion, her ally, the unstoppable force that had turned the tables of the hunt. To the Empire, Rascal had been nothing more than a foolish pet, a creature they believed no more dangerous than the humans they captured. But in the blink of an eye, he had torn through their ranks with the ferocity of a true warrior. The Empire had learned that the hard way. From the distant hilltop, Lord Vraknos watched the scene unfold. His heart pounded in his chest as his golden eyes scanned the battlefield. He had failed. The humans, the very species he had laughed at and belittled, had torn apart his hunting party. His mind raced, trying to find some way to salvage his honor, some way to restore the Empire's pride. How could this happen? He muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. A few hours earlier, he had been confident, too confident. He had thought himself a master of the hunt, the greatest of the Empire's nobles. He had mocked humans as nothing more than pets to be hunted for sport. But Serena had shattered that delusion with each fallen hunter. She had turned his soldiers into trophies, their bodies scattered like playthings. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into the flesh of his palms. He had underestimated the humans in a way he could never have predicted. They were not fragile, not weak, not the defenseless creatures the Empire believed them to be. They were capable of anything, even defeating the greatest hunters the Empire could send. Lord Vraknos. A voice snapped him from his thoughts. One of his remaining officers approached, his eyes wide with terror. The human woman, she's coming for you. Vraknos straightened, his posture stiffening in shock and anger. What? He turned to look back at the officer, his eyes narrowing. How dare she? But his words faltered when he saw it. Serena Locke, standing at the edge of the clearing, her figure silhouetted against the twilight sky. Her stance was unyielding, her movements calm and controlled. Rascal stood beside her, his fierce gaze locked on the remaining Imperials, his blood-stained muzzle dripping with the remnants of their comrades. Vraknos felt the weight of his own arrogance crashing down on him. For the first time in his life, he realized that he was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. Get the transport. Vraknos barked to his officer. We are leaving this wretched place immediately. But before he could turn to flee, a voice rang out, cutting through the air like a blade. You think you can run? Serena's voice was cold, her tone laced with deadly intent. You've underestimated me for the last time, Vraknos. The Lord froze. He had thought to escape, to return to the Empire and lick his wounds, but now he realized that his reputation was shattered. His failure would be a stain on his family name, one that would never be washed away. The Empire's mockery of humanity had been its undoing, and he had been the fool to champion that arrogance. Do you know what I'm going to do? Serena continued, her eyes narrowing with cold fury. I'm going to make sure you never forget this day. The Empire will remember how you treated us, how you treated my people, and they'll pay for it. Vrakno's mouth went dry. His fingers twitched nervously, but he stood his ground. You are a fool, human, he spat. Do you really think you can take on the might of the Empire? Serena's lips curled into a grim smile. You didn't take us seriously when you should have. And now, your Empire will see that we are not to be mocked. With a swift motion, she drew her plasma knife from its sheath. It hummed to life in her hand, its blade glowing with lethal intent. The officer, recognizing the threat, immediately raised his weapon, but Serena was faster. She moved like a storm, a blur of motion as she closed the distance. Before the officer could even fire, she disarmed him with a single, fluid strike, the plasma knife slicing through his weapon and his armor like it was paper. He collapsed, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with fear. Vraknos took a step back, his confidence now shattered. You think this will end with me? The Empire is vast. You'll never. Serena was on him before he could finish his sentence. Her blade was at his throat, the sharp edge pressing against his blue-scaled skin. You've lost, Vraknos, she said quietly. Your Empire is broken. You are broken. Lord Vraknos looked into her eyes, and for the first time in his life, he saw something inhuman in them, something ancient, something primal. The same fire that had burned in humanity for millennia, a fire that could not be extinguished by oppression or ridicule. End it, he whispered. Serena hesitated for only a moment. Then, with a swift, precise movement, she severed his head from his shoulders, the sound of his body crumpling to the ground filling the air. The mockers were no more. Rascal stepped forward, his eyes locked on the fallen noble, and then at Serena. He growled, but there was no need for further violence. It was over. The Empire had mocked humanity's strength, its will, and its ability to survive. But now, the universe would know that humanity was not to be underestimated. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Serena Locke and Rascal stood victorious, a single truth echoing in the silence of the forest. The mockers had fallen, and the Empire would never forget.